It's pretty amazing. She's the director of I couldn't scroll through fast enough, but you've done such amazing work in research. She's the director of the Neuroscience and Rehabilitation Laboratory and serves as the outreach director for the Center for Brain Recovery and Repair. The desire to serve persons with brain injury and disease and their family and friends fuels all of her academic endeavors, research, teaching, and service. She truly has done all three of those. Her clinical research focuses on communication disorders following acquired brain injury or disease in adults and the development of more sensitive assessments, more powerful treatment approaches. This is such as brain stimulation as an enhancer that leads to improvements in life participation. She completed her BS at the University of Georgia in 2001 and her master's at the University of Arizona in 2003, after which she became a speech-language pathologist. She continued her work in this role until she completed her PhD at the University of Georgia. She had a postdoctoral fellowship focusing on communication neuroscience with neuroimaging and brain stimulation at the University of South Carolina. In 2020, she was recognized as Aphasia Distinguished Scholar by the Tavistock Trust. She also conducts state and federally funded research, and most recently in May of 2021, was awarded a 5-year grant from the NIH to study the effects of adjunctive brain stimulation in persons with chronic stroke-induced aphasia. So it's a pleasure to welcome her. She worked with us this year. We had a series of talks for our heart disease and stroke work group. My dog agrees, and she just was so generous in providing her knowledge to everyone. So welcome, Jessica. I'm so grateful for you to share with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. As you read, and as people here that know me, I actually recognize some names here. I'm incredibly passionate about getting the word out in the community about these topics and about these populations in need. So I'm happy for this opportunity. And I thank you for working with my schedule. I have a student who is defending her thesis this afternoon, and so we couldn't interfere with that. All right, so I'm just gonna jump right in, and I have a couple of points along the way where I'm going to ask some questions, and I'll just ask you to do some responses in the chat box. Right now, I'm gonna share my screen and make sure that, this is different sharing. I can't do a portion. All right, so this is going to change my strategy here for a moment. It doesn't let me.
Are you looking to share the presenter view of your PowerPoint?
No, I'm looking to share a portion of the screen, and it doesn't. Is that something that you guys can change on your end?
You should be able to do it with your sharing options, ideally when you go to advanced, right?
Yeah, it's not there today. Usually it is. Usually it's the second one, but it's not there.
How strange.
Jessica, I'll make you host, and I'll go away from being a host, and you can take it from there, okay?
Oh, okay, and then I'll switch it back right after. Is that
That's
Trish?
Yes, that's Trish. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
All right, let's try it one more once. Nope, it doesn't. It must not be enabled for this meeting. Okay. All right, that's all right. We are going to be flexible, and my animations maybe just won't work as nicely. Let me change something around really quickly. All righty. Bummer. I like my animations.
Oh.
So do you see the whole presenter view, or do you just see the slide?
We see the slide, and the next slide, we don't see any presenter notes. So we've seen your main slide and then the next slide coming,
Okay.
but it's small.
All right, play from start. All right, here we go. How about that? You just see the slide?
Yes, we do. Perfect.
Okay.
And we see you as a speaker.
Perfect. All right. So we are going to make it happen. So I am going to open up this topic, understanding chronic communication disorders. I can't cover them all. We only have so much time. There are a lot of chronic communication disorders that we could talk about. I'm going to focus our attention to two, and the two that I study, two of the three that I study most closely. So here, I really want to clear up a little terminology for us here because sometimes there's some confusion about what is speech, what is language, what is communication. And so I just wanted to give you some examples here of what speech problems would be. And this would be problems with voice, fluency, or how a person says speech sounds. And you know, probably the things that you're most aware of or comfortable with here would be a stuttering disorder or an articulation disorder. And other terms that you may not be as familiar with would be dysarthria or apraxia of speech. There are language problems which are different from speech problems, and this involves problems with understanding and are using spoken, written, and or other symbol systems. And this can be phonological disorders, and also the one that we're going to talk about today, which is aphasia. And finally, there's communication, and communication problems includes speech language problems, but it also includes people who might have pragmatic issues, problems with the social use of speech and language, cognitive issues that interferes with their communication. And so some examples that I have listed for you there are pragmatic disorders, cognitive communication disorder, auditory processing disorders, and these other examples that are listed in the other columns. And the two that we're really going to zoom in on here today are aphasia and cognitive communication disorder. So we're going to start by talking about aphasia. And I'd like to have you all participate in the chat to just, before we talk about it at all, to just ask you the question, have you heard of this term and what does it mean to you? How would you describe it? How would you define it? So if you could just take a minute to spend some time in the chat there. Don't be shy. Oh, good. I love this. You're already giving me some fantastic stuff to work with. All right, got 3 folks. 4 or 5 have heard it. I like that, John, you've heard it, but you're not quite sure what it is, so you can't map it to anything, right? Difficulty communicating. We've got some language there. You know the cause. All right, let's get a few more. There's 38 of you guys. I'll be happy when we get halfway there. How about 19? All right, and someone actually here has personal firsthand experience with stroke and aphasia, and given an example of her firsthand experience. Good. All right, so thank you for taking that time with me. And now let's learn a little bit more about it. And if you still want to put it in there in the chat, I would love it if you did that. The more responses we have, the better. This helps me get a good idea of, you know, kind of baseline community knowledge, even for people who work with, you know, chronic disease. All right, so we're going to start by talking about aphasia, by talking about the power of words. And, you know, we even put words together in phrases and sentences to talk about the power of words. Here's a proverb for you. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That's Proverbs. Wise words from Buddha: speak only the speech that neither torments self nor does harm to others. And then, of course, my personal favorite that gets used in my house a lot, which is watch your mouth. Once you say it, you don't get a take back. So this is me and all parents here on this Zoom call today. So I want you to think, and this is where we're going to get serious for a moment, what if your words were taken from you? Not the right to use them, which is relevant today, but your ability to formulate them and to understand them. I want you to think about what might change in your life in your day, even in this hour, if you could no longer find your words? So again, take a moment in the chat with me to think about, okay, what would change about this meeting if you had a hard time with your words? What would change about your work, your career, your family, your friends? What about your roles, your relationship with family and friends? What about your roles in the community? If you could write some messages in the chat and let me know how you think this might change. What would be hard? What would be impossible? Good, I've got 2 responses so far. Keep them coming. Stifling, energy, motivation. Yeah, communicating your own needs, advocating, which is a lot of the work that you all do here too, is advocating for others. So how would it impact your ability to do that? If you're a clinician, right? Your job is language and talk based, couldn't do your job, okay? And then take the next step, okay? Well, what would happen if you can't do your job? People would think less of you, frustration, isolation. I couldn't nag my kids to get things done. You can nag, you don't have to have words to nag. Throw something, right? Throw something and point. Too much time, loss of job, hardship, depression. Okay, so you guys are already kind of forecasting some of the consequences that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. All right, so words and the ability to use and understand them, they live in your brain. And the left side of the brain is very important for language. You have millions of neurons and support cells there that work together to give you access to language and communication. And unfortunately, in a manner of seconds or minutes, those neurons can be damaged, or they can be starved of necessary blood oxygen, and those words are gone. And this is aphasia. And a simple way to remember what aphasia is, or a definition of aphasia, is when people have difficulty speaking, difficulty understanding, difficulty reading, and difficulty writing. This can be caused by a blockage or an ischemic stroke. And shown here is an example of a clot that's cutting off the blood supply to the brain. It can be caused by a rupture stroke or a hemorrhagic stroke. And this example is showing a ruptured aneurysm. It can be caused by TBI when something penetrates the brain. When you have a nasty fall, a bad car crash. So there's lots of causes. It can also be caused by other types of brain damage, such as brain infection, brain surgery or brain tumor resection, and other different ways that it can be caused by damage to your brain. Progressive neurological disorders can also cause aphasia, and we're not going to focus on them here. That's a whole different lecture talking about a primary progressive aphasia, dementias, Alzheimer's with language involvement, things like that. So I'm happy to come back to do that sometime. But we are going to focus on, oops, it's not advancing. Yeah, we're going to focus on these problems after sudden acquired injury. So between 2.4 and 4 million people in the United States currently have aphasia. This is according to a recent poll by a recent updating of the literature and meta-analysis by Aphasia Access. And, you know, it used to be said that, oh, about 1 million people have aphasia. Now we know that a conservative estimate is 2.4 and the higher end is closer to 4. It's actually over 4. And according to Aphasia Access, Centers for Disease Control, and National Aphasia Association, many, many more Americans are going to acquire aphasia each year. Importantly, for this talk too, over 30% of adults who have a brain injury, whether it be the stroke cause or the TBI cause or the brain tumor cause, whatever, they're going to have chronic or persistent aphasia, where it's going to be there for the remainder of their lives. The percentage percentage is higher if it's because of a stroke or brain tumor, and it's a little lower if they have a TBI, but it evens out to about 30. But it can be up to 66% for the stroke and the brain tumor surgery, depending upon who's doing the survey. There are two main types of aphasia. There's the fluent, also called receptive type, and there's the non-fluent, also called expressive type. And just to give you a little bit of description, a little more context to understand these, for fluent aphasia, this is where they're going to be able to speak fluently, and that means that they can, I need you to separate it from stuttering. We're not talking about stuttering. This just means that words come out with ease, but they're not always words. So words or non-words come out with ease, not a whole lot of effort is required, and it's a pretty normal speed. Fluent aphasia also involves receptive problems where people have trouble comprehending and repeating things that they've heard. And one type of fluent aphasia, one of the more severe types of fluent aphasia, is Wernicke's aphasia. And this is when it can happen when you have damage to the temporal lobe of the brain. And then I have some examples here. A person with Wernicke's aphasia might think that they are saying, I want to get strawberries at the store. But what they really say is, I winter do stinger at the steaming. They also might hear, or someone might say the following: go get dressed so we can run errands before we have to see our family at dinner tonight. And all they can hear is dresser, run, errand, family. I don't understand what they're saying to me. They can't really understand what's being said. So it's not just a problem saying what they want to say, they're not hearing the message either. For non-fluent, this is when they can say words, often with errors, but with a lot of effort and at a slower than normal speed. And it's also called expressive. They have problems producing words, phrases, sentences, and repeating. The other thing is that sometimes people say that their receptive abilities are intact. They're not. They're a strength for this population, but they're not typical, they're not normal, they're not intact. They still will have problems with receptive abilities or comprehension. It just may be a strength for them, and they may only have problems at sentence and like conversational levels. One type of non-fluent aphasia is Broca's aphasia. And so I'm trying to hit on the ones that maybe you've heard of before, if you're familiar with this term. And this can result from damage to the frontal lobe of the brain. And an example here is someone with Broca's aphasia may say, walk dog. And what they're trying to say is, I will take the dog for a walk. Or they might say, book, book, to table. And that means there are two books on the table. Another type, and the most severe type, is global aphasia. And this is, it occurs after extensive damage to the left hemisphere language areas of the brain, and results in severe communication difficulties, and they may be extremely limited in their ability to speak and understand language. The important thing about this, and the good thing about this, is that aphasia types can evolve. So someone might have a global aphasia, for example, right after the stroke or brain injury, but after they recover, it may evolve into a Broca's aphasia, it may evolve into a Wernicke's, a conduction, these other types of aphasia. The aphasia types are not necessarily static from day one. Another type, and this is important, is latent aphasia. Some other names for it are very mild, subclinical, and we're trying to shed light on it because basically people can have this type of aphasia, which is very mild in terms of how they're scoring, like on a naming test or something like that. But it's not very mild in terms of how it's affecting their lives. They still have similar rates of depression, similar rates of unemployment, of family strife, economic hardships, things of that nature. Sorry, someone is G-chatting me. I need to turn that off. Latent aphasia results from minor damage. So you can see these much smaller pinholes in the brain to language areas of the brain. And again, mild communication difficulties that may only be picked up in discourse and conversation. There are other types of aphasia. Here are just some examples: anomic, mixed, subcortical, dynamic, and more. And these different types result from damage to different language areas of the brain. And not just the areas of the brain made of gray matter that you're probably more familiar with, like the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes, and also this hidden insula lobe here that some of you may not be familiar with. But also importantly, the communication lines between them. There are connections between these brain areas called white matter tracts, and you can think of them as connecting highways or extensive telephone systems that help these areas communicate. Different locations of damage to these specialized areas here and their communication lines will lead to different aphasia types. And with these different types, some language skills are going to be stronger than others dependent upon type. Though some skills are stronger though, all language skills will be impacted to some degree. That's what we find, is that really nothing is typical for people who have chronic. It may be very, very mild. It may not really be a huge issue until they're in a communication time pressure situation, or a more challenging conversational situation, or if they have less cognitive reserve. Thank you, Trish. I'm so glad that you're saying that, because I'm glad that we can shed light on the fact that it's not just people talking, it's also people understanding. And I'm so happy that you have showed us that this is an important educational opportunity. The other thing too that may be surprising then is that reading and writing are usually affected to some degree. It may be extremely difficult for some, and it may be a relative strength for others. But reading and writing is dependent on language, and aphasia is a language disorder, and so reading and writing are usually affected. People with aphasia have described their challenges with very haunting imagery. My brain is holding my words hostage. You can see how this would be quite emotional. The mouth being zipped up and not being able to get any words out. So I want you to take a moment. Now that we've entered into this, now I'd like for you to tell me what you know about aphasia. And I want what you have learned, what new things you have learned about aphasia. If you could put that in the chat. And then I just want you to take a moment and breathe, because this is a lot of stuff that you've learned. And it's a lot of heavy stuff that you've learned as well about aphasia. So just take a minute to do that. I'm going to time us. While you're writing, I'll answer some questions too. Someone asked about, where does hearing, deafness fall under that? Speech and language. It would be under communication, because people who are deaf can still learn language. They have their own language in many cases, depending upon which language system they are taught and learn. But people who are deaf or hard of hearing can have speech problems because they can't hear the information that they need to say the speech sounds in a typical fashion. So they may have speech problems. They can also have language problems. So they can be deaf or hard of hearing and have aphasia or dysarthria. They can get a stroke and have something else as well. So that was one of the questions. Another question was, can people get aphasia from drug use? Drug use leading to strokes and TBI is actually one of a big cause, especially in younger individuals. And depending upon where their brain damage is, it can lead to aphasia. They may also not necessarily have a stroke, but may have some sort of anoxic event where they're, not getting the oxygen that they need into their brain. And this can lead to speech and language problems as well. All right, so keep it coming. We're going to wrap that up, and we're going to talk about and think about something else. And this is cognitive communication disorder. So before I talk about it and tell you what it is, I'd like for you to let me know in the chat, has anyone heard of this, cognitive communication disorder, or CCD? What does it mean to you? So that's a two-part question. Have you heard of it? Yes or no? What does it mean? It's either going to be not applied if you've never heard of it, or if you have heard of it, but it doesn't really mean anything, then I've heard of it, but it doesn't mean anything. Or yes, I've heard of it, and here's what I think it is. All right, so I've never heard of CCD. There's a question about aphasia. I'm going to come back to that. Someone says my sister had a stroke and has it. I'm thinking you mean CCD there. Angela, let me know. Have not heard of it. Have never heard of it. Never heard of it. Something to do with executive functioning. Okay. Ability to think of what is heard or said, but not be able to vocalize. Cognitive deficits. Have not heard of it. Have heard of it, but don't know much about it. All right. All right. So aphasia, the term aphasia has been around for a while. It used to be called something else. There were a couple of other names. It was aphemia. What was the other one? I teach about this in my class, and of course I can't think of it. But aphasia was around since the late 1800s, the term. Cognitive communication disorder has really only been recognized since the mid 2000s, and it's been clinically described, but it's never been given really a name or an ICD code. Now it has an ICD code, and so, you know, we're getting better at recognizing it, at diagnosing it, but we need a lot more awareness and education and recognition, because CCD can really interfere with every aspect of your life. So let's talk about it and think about it. So human beings are social. So we talked about words, and now we're talking about kind of that social aspect of words. We rely on intact communication abilities to build relationships, to interact with our community, and to co-participate with members of our circle. We also rely on intact communication abilities to gain and maintain employment for financial stability and well-being. And I think we would all agree here that that is very important. Difficulty communicating can therefore prevent people from participating in life roles that require communication, which, let's face it, includes almost all of your life roles. So here's a quote from Daniel Webster: "If all my possessions were taken from me with one exception, I would choose to keep the power of communication, for by it I would soon regain all the rest." So you can imagine then how negatively impacted your life would be if you could not do that, if you could not get all of your possessions back, with the power of your communication, with the power of using your words and knowing how to use them and when to use them and with whom to use them. So when learning about aphasia, 2 minutes ago, we discussed the importance of the left side of the brain for words and language. But for communication, there are millions of brain cells that work together throughout your entire brain. And this is going to be on the left side and the right side. And these brain cells from all over the brain must communicate so that you can communicate in everyday life situations. Okay, so they have to communicate left and right all over so that you can communicate in everyday life situations. If the communication pathways are damaged, or if they are dysfunctional in some way, or if the communication hubs are damaged or dysfunctional, then the ability to communicate is negatively impacted. And sometimes this is because thinking problems, and some of you guys brought this up in the chat, like problems with attention, concentration, memory, and problem solving, they're actually going to lead to direct problems with communicating. And this is what we call cognitive communication disorder. And so CCD, that's what I'm going to call it for now, just to save a few seconds every time I say it, refers to difficulties in communicative competence, like listening, speaking, reading, writing, conversations, and social interaction that result from underlying cognitive impairments. So these underlying cognitive impairments are attention, memory, organization, information processing, problem solving, and executive functions. And it's defined as communication impairments resulting from underlying cognitive deficits due to neurological impairment. And these neurological impairments are the same things that we discussed. So TBI is one of the big causes of COGCOM. Stroke, maybe more to the frontal areas or to right hemisphere areas, are the bigger causes of cognitive communication, or CCD. So those same neurological impairments, so I'm not going to rehash them here. And similar to aphasia, different locations of damage to different brain areas that are used for cognition and communication, or damage to those communication lines, those wires or roads that we talked about. They're going to lead to different profiles of communication problems. So 2 profiles are shown here. The left one is showing, okay, their memory's okay, their attention is impacted, their self-awareness is pretty good, visuospatial ability is not so good. And the way that we might describe them in terms of cognition or communication would be, okay, they have inefficient discourse, difficulty communicating with colleagues, difficulty organizing their work, and so on. For the one on the right, their memory is impacted, their attention is impacted, they're not very self-aware, and so they may not even know that they have a problem or care that they have a problem or be compliant with any sort of therapy regimen. Executive function is impacted, but their visuospatial skills are good, and so they might have a different profile. Another way that you can think of it is as a tuner or a soundboard. So my musicians here may really understand this example, where the different channels on the tuner are going to represent different cognitive abilities. And depending upon the type of brain damage and the severity of brain damage, these different channels are going to be up or down to different degrees. And that combination altogether is going to lead to a certain profile of communication abilities and deficits. So some cognitive abilities are going to be stronger than others, depending upon their profile. And people with CCD might have one or more of the following problems: difficulty planning, difficulty organizing, difficulty modifying plans, difficulty managing multiple responsibilities, difficulty processing written information, which we're heavily reliant on, trouble with concepts of time and money, difficulty understanding and managing personal, financial, legal matters, difficulty reading emotions, difficulty managing emotions, difficulty understanding humor. And as you can imagine, all of these things make it very difficult to communicate effectively with friends, family, coworkers, customers, and more. Some people also with cognitive problems and CCD are often unaware of their deficits and unaware of their mistakes, and this can make it very hard for the recovery process. These people also tend to have even more difficulty self-monitoring, following rules, and predicting the consequences of their actions. All right, so I'd like for you to take a moment to write a quick note in the chat about what you've learned about CCD. If you that you've met anyone maybe with CCD, now that you know what this term is, and then take that other moment to breathe.
Jessica, as you were sharing, there's a couple of questions in the chat. And can this happen with seizures is one question. And then the other is, how does CCD relate to stage fright, knowing what I say, but does not come out clearly speaking in front of a group?
So in terms of seizures, people who have seizure disorders oftentimes have different brain anatomy, and they can have different cognitive problems that can lead to problems with communication. So definitely folks, for example, with epilepsy and with a history of seizures may have a profile that is very similar to this. For the stage fright, I don't know. I think probably with stage fright, at least from what I know, is that, you know, that's more of not an imbalance, but your limbic system, your primitive system, your fear-based system, your anxiety-based system kind of takes over during those moments and has more power than your frontal lobe during those times. And what you need to do is to get your frontal lobe back online to have it be in charge. But that wouldn't be a CCD. It is very common. Well, first, it is most common for CCD to not be diagnosed at all, to not be recognized, even when people advocate very heavily for awareness or to say over and over again, I'm having a problem, please help me, and they still don't get the help that they need. And yes, it is also common for folks to be given a different diagnosis that is not correct, and this may be a mental health diagnosis. Yep, inoperable brain tumor. Yeah, so definitely with that brain tumor, he's going to be having some changes in his brain, and it's going to change how these areas are communicating, and I would expect that he would have some problems from that. All right, so if you could take another couple minutes while I'm going to transition to the next part, but please write your thoughts about CCD, and we're going to talk about some of the impacts and some of the disparities. So let's talk about chronic aphasia and cognitive communication disorder. So chronic aphasia or cognitive CCD. So even the mildest aphasia or CCD can reduce engagement in friendly and familiar relationships, and also make interacting in the community very, very difficult. And the impact of aphasia or CCD here can be incredibly devastating. It can prevent people from participating in life roles that require communication, which, like I said, is really almost all of our life roles. There aren't that many that you could name right now that don't involve communication of some sort. Compared to brain injured persons with deficits other than aphasia or CCD, so if you compare to people who have physical deficits, who have, the same amount of trauma that might be associated with their brain injury, these folks with these communication problems still have a higher incidence of depression, higher incidence of social isolation, less friendships, reduced quality of life, reduced life participation. And that, that really just tells us too, there's something very special about our words and our ability to communicate, and something very especially impacted when that is no longer there for us as readily as we need it to be. All right, there we go. Aphasia and CCD often ends careers, with most chronic survivors being unemployed or underemployed. So sometimes you'll read about return to work, and it's like, oh, we've got a 50 or 60% return to work. Well, that's not great. But also, if you look a little more closely at that information, they may be returning to work, but they're usually not returning to the work that they did before the brain injury. And that's what I'm calling underemployed. And the subsequent financial hardships and changes, again, are devastating. The impact of aphasia and CCD extend beyond the brain injury survivor, rippling outward to care partners and to society at large. The burden and the stress that can result from caring for or living with a person with aphasia or CCD can just be heavy. Shown here are a father and daughter, but the partner could be a spouse, a child, a parent, or some other family member or friend. And what we know with my research and others is that the changes in the lives of care partners are mostly negative and include reduced physical, psychological, and financial well-being. There are negative changes also in the ability and desire to participate in relationships, community, and life activities. There may be changes in their employment as well. Care partners may need to work less hours or have a more flexible schedule. And as we all know, this means reduced pay or sometimes job loss. Some jobs or careers may need to be given up altogether, depending upon the needs of the one that is receiving the care. And care partners are actually more likely I'll say this again, care partners are actually more likely to have depression than the brain injured person. And these negative changes, the depression, the strain, also leads to change in physical health status and actually makes them more at risk for potentially fatal health conditions, including stroke. So then we have this circle, this vicious circle coming back to us. So I wanted to look at some racial and or ethnic differences in outcomes. The first is just incidence. So all ethnic minority groups are at greater risk for stroke and brain injury. And I had them listed here. And more than that, most of these groups are really lacking culturally and linguistically appropriate materials to help them understand the disability, to find resources, to know where to go, to have options for where to go, especially for folks of certain legal residence status. So that's for persons with brain injury. There are also gender differences with racial and ethnic interactions and outcomes observed in incidence, TBI. And I just want to make a note here because generally, anytime you look at the CDC, most of the numbers are going to say that males are more likely to have higher rates of TBI, and minority males even more so. And I'm not saying that the CDC data are wrong because they surveil what they surveil, but it doesn't include the silent epidemic of domestic violence survivors. And for most of those, it goes unreported, it's not counted, it's not included, and CDC knows that. And there are way more females who are victims of domestic violence, which often involves traumatic brain injury or anoxic events, way more than athletes. Athletes get all the attention and they should get some attention, but there's so many more domestic violence survivors that have this silent epidemic going on. So that's something to think about, to take with a grain of salt when you're looking at these incident numbers for TBI. Something that may be of a surprise to you is that women are actually more likely to have stroke and aphasia than men. And women who are minorities are even more likely to have a stroke than men or white women. Care partners, so this isn't about the brain injured person, this is just about the caregiving and related also to gender, and that care partners are also more likely to be females, and the burden is also more likely to fall on females if they are in ethnic minorities. So not only do we have in a lot of cases more of the disability burden, but we have this secondary disability burden on women and as a result of their care partnering. It's a word. I can make up words. I'm a speech language pathologist. So in terms of SES, there are different outcomes in terms of SES. So all ethnic minority groups have lower SES. In these brain injured populations and caregivers. So again, this extends to the care partner as well. For physical health status, all ethnic minority groups report worse physical health than the white brain injured participants and care partners, or white European American. And in terms of support from friends, this is actually where it shifts a little bit. So all ethnic minority caregiving and brain injury groups are actually more likely to receive some support from family members and friends compared to white or European Americans. So there's a lot to unpack there as well. So what can we do? A few things. I have a few suggestions and hopefully we'll talk about them in the breakout rooms as well. And first you can communicate, and I'd like to challenge you to communicate with people with aphasia and with people with CCD. I have that communication is a 2+ way street here. Communication and participation in life is at least partially determined by you guys, by the willingness of typically communicating community members to communicate with them. But so often, typical communicators will kind of avoid such situations because of their own feelings of inadequacy, like, what if I can't understand them? What if I can't help them? What if this is hard? Or what if this is awkward? But just try. Believe me, they want you to try. Accept their efforts, accept their pauses, their difficulty, their awkwardness, have a lot of patience, use multiple modalities of language, empathy, but please try to communicate with them. The next, awareness. So you can help raise awareness. I have an example here. We have wheelchair ramps in the community, but where are the communication ramps? So I want you to just take another minute to think, okay, I'm going out in my community and I have a problem talking to someone. If I have a problem walking, there's a ramp or there's a bar. If you have a problem talking or understanding, what help do you have? Think about your favorite restaurant. Do you think that there's help? Think about when you're calling about something on your credit card. Do you think that there's help? Even some churches who oftentimes, may have certain programs in place for the physically disabled. Is there help for communication? Think about your community right now and think about what communication ramps there are or there aren't. So while you're thinking about that, I just go ahead and tell you too, the sad fact of it is there aren't a whole lot of support groups. There's not a whole lot of treatment groups. There's not a whole lot of advocacy. And a lot of times the people with brain injury and the care partners are too tired to do these things themselves. They're dealing with a lot of other things and they need as much help as possible to raise the awareness for changes in therapy coverage, for communication ramps in the community, however you might define that. It might be larger print. It might be written materials with pictures. It might be audio to go with written words. There's a number of different ways that are pretty easy in this digital day and age, but that we don't have in our community. Closed captions for virtual meetings, that's good unless you have a reading problem, right? Or information processing and speed of information problem. So it'll help for some, but not for all. Printed materials are great too, again, unless they have that reading problem. Case manager, and we do have difficulty with enough case managers in this community who actually know what aphasia and what CCD is and what their needs are. We find, again, that access to services is difficult, sometimes depending upon how chronic they are, how mild they are, where they are in terms of rural versus metro, money, obviously, and also racial and ethnic minority status. They need your voice and they need your energy. And a point that I also want to make here is that latent aphasia is very easy to miss. And CCD, as I just mentioned, is a new diagnostic category. Both are too often undiagnosed, which results in avoidable and unaddressed disability. And these are oftentimes, people who, may still have a whole lot to give to their community and to their society if just given the chance, if just given the training, and if just receiving the proper rehabilitation program. The third is R for reach out. So reach out to people with aphasia and CCD and their care partners, draw them out, help them participate. Reach out to create volunteer opportunities, job opportunities, avocational stuff or avocational stuff, so that they can still, again, participate and learn, continued learning opportunities that are aphasia or CCD friendly. Many people with aphasia and CCD want nothing more than to contribute, to feel useful, to feel needed, and there aren't even very many non-paying opportunities for that. So reach out to the Brain Injury Association, the Stroke Associations, the Aphasia Associations, to learn as much as you can too about how to reach out. And reach out to be a part of our community engaged initiatives and research. The last I have here is educate. So please educate others about this topic, spread the word. This will not only help with prevention of stroke and brain injury, but it will also create a more supportive community for the people who have chronic disabilities and chronic communication disabilities as a result of these stroke and brain injuries. I have a lot of tools for this. I'm happy to share them with you here. We actually had developed some educational modules, which are for companies, for communities, for churches, you know, to give people like basic education that they need about this. And I can send those links right away. I can put them in the chat to get you started. I wanted to make a note here on education, is that this is a huge problem right now in this community. I just got off the phone yesterday with someone and I was so upset because a critical issue to focus on is what people are still being led to believe in our community. And this is happening at UNMH and PRES here in this community for people who just had strokes and just had brain injury. And this is where they are still being told that where you are at a year after your brain injury is as good as you're going to get. And that is a lie. But people are still being told that. I'm used to hearing that from people who had strokes 5, 10 years ago. But this is just from someone who had a stroke in November and someone who had a motor vehicle accident, TBI, and a stroke in October of last year. And they're still being told that 1 year is it. And this is wrong. This has been proven false time and time and time again with research, yet people still get dropped from services after a year, and they also lose hope, right? So, and then they don't seek services because they're like, okay, well, this is it. But research shows definitively, you can tell I'm passionate about this, that language and communication abilities can continue to improve for many, many years, and recovery is not over after 1 year. And we need some crazy, crazy information, advocacy, education, awareness campaigns about that, because people are definitely still being misinformed. So please help us do all of those things. Care, right? So communicate, promote awareness, reach out and educate. An informed community, as you all know, being part of CDPC is a healthier community. We must work together to help people live well with aphasia and live well with cognitive communication disorder. It's not the end of life. There are still opportunities, especially if the community will rise up and help make those opportunities for them. We can come together as healthcare professionals, service professionals, business owners, friends, family, community members, survivors, and care partners with support and understanding, and help them to do what we all want to do, which is to live life and live it fully. So that is my presentation today, and I'm happy to take questions. I feel like I just saw one. And yes, I will absolutely send you links so that you can get started. Oh, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Dr. Richardson, there's one I saw on the list here as you hand over the host power back to Trish. That'd be great. Is it common for CCD to be misdiagnosed?
Yes, or undiagnosed, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of the time what we find, sorry, I'm trying to find Trish. Make host, there you go. You are host again, my friend. You know, for example, we had this is the other thing that we do too. So in my lab, we do in-depth assessments that are really not available clinically in most places. It allows us to dive deep. If people don't want to participate in the research, we'll still do like a 1.5 hour like service assessment, because we don't want them to feel coerced to do research. But having said that, what usually happens for people with CCD is that, you know, they've seen a neuropsychologist for some period of time for, you know, some cognitive issues, and they've been discharged. They can't work, and they're trying to get disability benefits. but they can't, because there's no piece of paper anywhere where anyone is saying that there's any sort of problem with them. And then, we get them in and we run them through our protocol and we're like, oh yeah, like they've got CCD. Like we can, see it right away through the measures that we have. And in many cases, actually, we've, helped people get services. We've actually, our information, our diagnosis has helped someone in a court battle that they were having as well. And this has also happened even in stroke and aphasia. We've had someone who had a latent aphasia or very mild aphasia and also mild apraxia of speech. He could no longer work, and it wasn't for lack of trying. He was doing everything that he could to try to go back to work. And, he was laid off from a job, he was put in a volunteer position, et cetera, and couldn't get benefits because there was nothing, again, in the paperwork, nothing sensitive enough to alert anyone to the fact that he had an issue that would prevent him. And again, the work that we were able to do to identify that and to characterize that helped him eventually get those benefits that he needed. And so, it's not specific to CCD. It happens with aphasia as well, which is, even more well known. But it is a problem for sure. That was a long answer.
Thanks, Dr. Richardson. No, that's great. And then there was another question, was there any apps or do you know any other resources that you can suggest?
Yeah, so there's there's really great apps, and I'm happy to let you guys know too. We're actually going to start a clinical trial here with constant therapy. And so I'll type that in here. There's something called Constant Therapy. It's a great app that has cognitive as well as linguistic tasks that people can do. We're going to do a clinical trial here where basically we'll meet virtually once a week, and then we'll assign them homework through the app. And we're just kind of tracking to see, how compliant they are, if it helps with certain outcomes, things like that. There's also something called Tactus Therapy. There is something for folks who are more severe is Lingraphica, but there's also, they actually have something, it's called Talk Path News, which is good for everyone because they help to make the news of the day a little more aphasia or CCD friendly, because it's hard to follow sometimes. So those are some of the top 4 that I can see. And then, it's not going to hurt to work on other apps that, proclaim to work on your brain. It's just to, make sure that, it's not going to fix you, but anything that's going to work your brain and work your language for those tasks is going to be helpful. It is best, evidence-based practice tells us that it is best to use those computerized applications under the guidance of a qualified clinician. Admittedly, that's something that's still been hard to find or to create here in New Mexico. It's something that I'm working very hard to do, to create a list of providers that I know in the community who know how to work with folks with CCD, with aphasia, and also something called primary progressive aphasia.
Great. There's another question here that says, can a basic neuropsychological exam find aphasia or CCD, or is there a more extensive testing?
So usually they will aphasia, unless it's latent, is the more obvious one, and usually a neuropsych neurologist would be able to tell that and refer it to an SLP. The milder aphasias can go unnoticed, and very often go unnoticed, even by very seasoned neurologists. CCD can be suspected very often by neuropsychologists, and if they know about it, if they're trained in this, then they are likely to send a referral. But there are still there's still speech language pathologists who don't really know about CCD, and so there's definitely a lot of neuropsychs who don't know. I've been working with Mark Pedrati here with the cognitive echo, and he's had me on and a couple of other brain injury communication researchers on, and we've been able to use that echo to spread the word about CCD to the neuropsychs that are affiliated with that echo. So it's a start. I'm also offering additional like continuing ed opportunities, not for CEUs, because I'm not going to pay to offer that, but for people who want to up their knowledge about it, I announce them on my Facebook Lab page. And sometimes these are, you know, pre-recorded lectures or material dumps, you know, something like that, so that you can have access to that information.
Fantastic, thank you. And, you know, there's just some questions about having access to the page. This session is being recorded, and any other resources you want to share, Dr. Richardson, we could certainly include those with the recording on CDPC's website that Trish will be putting together.
Yep. So why don't I, while you guys transition, what I can do is just start listing some links. And then what I'll also do is we're in the process right now. We've had funding from the Brain Injury Advisory Council to develop a lot of materials, not only in English, but also in Spanish and Navajo, which we're super excited about. Because, you know, with Navajo, there was a special challenge because, you know, there's no word for aphasia. And even to recognize stroke, the only way that stroke was even described in Navajo was related to the arm or the leg weakness. Whereas we know it's balance problems, eye problems, speech problems, you know, face droop, all of that. And so we're able to, you know, use that to raise awareness just of stroke in that language. So that will all be finished and filled out by the end of this month. And what I can do is I can go ahead and share the Google Drive links. And some of the folders are empty right now because we're still refining things, but you can go ahead and have that link, and I can share my Facebook page and my lab page and my email. So
fantastic, great, thanks, Dr. Richardson. As you're doing that, we've got a little breakout of conversation. I know you sent us several questions, and you know, obviously you can hang out here.
Hey, you asked for it.
That's right. We asked for it, and you gave us some great ones. And so we wanted to ask people to get into some breakout rooms to potentially answer some of these questions. Come back, and then if they have further questions for you, to be able to put that in the chat if you're okay with that, and just spend about the next 10 minutes doing that. Is that okay with you?
Yes, I would love that. And I would just love it too if there were a scribe or a note taker from the groups, if they could just kind of write down the take-home points. That would be fantastic.
Thank you for reminding us of that. One note taker, at least in every group. We can have a facilitator in every group and a note taker. Would be wonderful to get some thoughts back to Dr. Richardson and to CDPC as well for what you're going to share. I want to share my screen for a moment and just share the questions as part of this process for us together. So what our questions are, you know, just briefly when you get into your groups, quick introduction of yourself, just go around who's in your group. And then, as Dr. Richardson had said, that women and ethnic racial minorities are more impacted by aphasia and cognitive communication disorder as brain injury survivors and as care partners. So our questions are, what are some first steps to addressing these disparities? And what can be done to improve the availability of services or access to services or quality of services, delivery, et cetera? So just if you could jot down a few notes of those. And if you have other thoughts, and you don't get a chance to share in your breakout, please put them in the chat when you come back. And as also was stated, many people with aphasia or cognitive communication disorder do not have access to services. There are too few support groups, depending on where they're located. They may not be eligible for services, depending on the severity level or how far they are in their post-brain injury. So the third question would be, you know, how should we go about training maybe mental health care professionals in this area? So these are the questions for the breakout. We will post them also in the general room so you can see these. If you want to take a screenshot for yourself just to check these questions or jot them down for yourself, if there's one you particularly want to answer. You don't have to answer all of them, but maybe just an answer of one of them, or you can answer several if you'd like. Any other clarifications you want to offer, Dr. Richardson, as we get this set up?
It's fantastic.
Okay, great. So I'm going to open up all the